Script. On Saturday, March 22nd, Donald Trump issued a 48-hour ultimatum. He said if Iran did not fully open the Strait of Hormuz, he would obliterate its power plants, starting with the biggest one first. The deadline was Monday, March 23rd at 7:44 p.m. Eastern Time. Monday came and the deadline expired and there were no strikes on power plants. Instead, Trump posted on Truth Social that talks were very good and productive and he was giving Iran 5 more days. The 5-day window expired on Friday, March 28th. There were no strikes on power plants. Instead, Trump posted on Truth Social again that as per Iranian government request, he was pausing the period of energy plant destruction for 10 more days until Monday, April 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That is the third deadline in 8 days. The first deadline expired with no strike. The second deadline expired with no strike. Now there is a third deadline. Iran called Trump's account of productive talks fake news. Iran rejected his 15-point peace proposal as a veiled demand for surrender. Iran issued 5 counter-conditions of its own that include war reparations and permanent sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on state television his government has not engaged in talks to end the war and does not plan on any negotiations. And while all of that was happening, the S&P 500 had its worst day since January. The Nasdaq sank more than 10% below its all-time high. Brent crude settled above $108 a barrel. The 10-year Treasury yield jumped to 4.42%. And mortgage rates climbed again for millions of Americans who had been waiting for them to fall. This is where day 28 of the Iran war finds the United States. 3 deadlines, no strikes, Iran setting its own terms, and markets telling the honest story that the diplomacy nobody can verify is not being believed by anyone who is actually betting real money on what happens next. Let us go through exactly what happened in the 72 hours before Trump's third deadline announcement, because the sequence matters more than the announcement itself. On Wednesday, Trump said at a Republican fundraising dinner something that revealed more about the actual state of negotiations than anything he said publicly. He told the crowd that Iranians want to make a deal so badly, but they are afraid to say it because they figure they will be killed by their own people. Then he added they are also afraid they will be killed by us. That is the President of the United States at a fundraising dinner admitting that the people he is supposedly negotiating with cannot acknowledge the negotiations publicly because their own government might execute them for doing so. On Thursday morning, Trump posted that Iranian negotiators are begging us to make a deal, yet they publicly state they are only looking at our proposal. He capitalized the word wrong and put it in quotation marks. And then on Thursday evening, after the stock market had its worst single day of the war, after the Dow dropped 469 points, after the Nasdaq sank 2.4%, after oil climbed nearly 5% to above $108, Trump posted the third deadline extension, 10 more days until April 6th, as per Iranian government request. The announcement came 10 minutes after the stock market closed. The oil price fell immediately after the post, then snapped back sharply within minutes. Brent crude was still hovering around $107 an hour after the announcement. The markets are no longer moving significantly on Trump's diplomatic announcements. They have been through this too many times. Now, here is what Trump actually said about why he gave 10 days instead of 7. He told Fox News that the Iranians had asked for a 1-week extension, but he decided on 10 days because they gave him ships. He was referring to his earlier claim that Iran allowed 10 oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz as a present to the United States. That is the negotiating architecture Trump is describing publicly. Iran lets a handful of tankers through. Trump extends his deadline. Iran gets more time before the power plants are at risk. Trump gets to tell his audience that talks are going very well, and the Strait of Hormuz remains 95% closed while all of this is happening. Before the war, more than 130 ships transited the strait every single day. The latest figures show 6 or fewer ships transiting per day in coordination with Iran. That is a 95% reduction in traffic. 10 tankers in exchange for 10 days. That is the rate of exchange Trump is accepting right now. 1 tanker per day of deadline extension. The entire global energy crisis, the oil above $100, the gas prices at their highest since 2022, the OECD raising its inflation forecast for G20 countries by 1.2 percentage points, all of that flowing from a strait where 6 ships move per day instead of 130. And Trump is giving Iran 10 more days in exchange for 10 ships. Iran's own position has been stated with complete clarity, and it deserves to be examined in full because it is the opposite of what Trump is describing. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi said on state television, "The government has not engaged in talks to end the war and does not plan on any negotiations." He acknowledged that messages had been exchanged through mediators, but called Washington's shift in tone an acknowledgement of failure after previously demanding unconditional surrender. Iran's state media quoted a senior security official saying Iran will end the war when it decides to do so and when its own conditions are met. And those 5 conditions Iran issued as its counter-proposal to America's 15 points are worth reading carefully, because each one of them individually would be nearly impossible for any American president to accept. And together they represent a framework that has no overlap with what Trump has been describing as 15 points of agreement. Iran's 5 conditions are: first, an end to all aggression by the enemy. Second, concrete guarantees preventing the recurrence of war, including ironclad assurances that America and Israel will never attack Iran again. Third, guaranteed payment of war damages and compensation to Iran for the destruction caused by Operation Epic Fury. Fourth, a comprehensive end to the war across all fronts, including against all resistance groups, meaning Hezbollah, the Houthis, and every Iran-backed proxy must be included in any ceasefire. And fifth, recognition of Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The White House dismissed these conditions immediately. But the fact that Iran went through the trouble of issuing a formal 5-point counterproposal rather than simply rejecting the American proposal and going silent suggests Iran is engaged in something. Whether that something is genuine diplomacy or a carefully managed information campaign designed to keep deadlines extending while the war grinds on is the question nobody in Washington can definitively answer right now. The stock market's reaction to all of this is the most honest real-time verdict available on where this war actually stands. The S&P 500 is now on track for a 5th straight losing week. That streak started before the Iran war began. It would be the longest such losing streak in nearly 4 years. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 469 points on Thursday alone. The Nasdaq is now more than 10% below its all-time high set earlier this year. The 10-year Treasury yield has jumped from 3.97% before the war to 4.42% on Thursday. That jump in bond yields has already fed through into higher mortgage rates for American families. Every additional 10 basis point move in the 10-year Treasury translates into roughly $70 per month in additional cost on a $400,000 mortgage. American families who were waiting for rate cuts to finally make housing affordable are now dealing with a war-driven bond market that is moving in exactly the opposite direction. And this is happening alongside gas at its highest price since October 2022, grocery bills climbing because fertilizer supply from the Gulf is disrupted, and the OECD projecting that U.S. inflation will hit 4.2% in 2026, a level not seen since the post-COVID inflation wave that cost Joe Biden his presidency. The credibility question around Trump's deadlines has now become the central issue in how this war is being managed diplomatically. A deadline that expires without consequence is not a deadline. It is a suggestion. Trump issued his first ultimatum on Saturday, March 22nd, with language as strong as any American president has used since the Cuban Missile Crisis. He said he would obliterate Iran's power plants, starting with the biggest one first. He gave 48 hours. The 48 hours expired. Nothing happened. He extended for 5 days based on talks Iran denied were taking place. The 5 days expired. Nothing happened. He extended for 10 more days as per Iranian government request, which is the most significant phrase in the entire announcement because it explicitly acknowledges that the country he is threatening with obliteration is now the party setting the schedule of his threats. The Iranian government requested a pause, and Trump granted it. That is the relationship dynamic embedded in that phrase. Iran is not responding to Trump's ultimatums. Iran is managing Trump's timeline. Reuters noted that analysts and investors see the Iranian regime as holding the upper hand and doubt that there are indeed productive negotiations with the U.S. When the people with the most money at stake in global markets are saying openly that Iran holds the upper hand, that is the market's verdict on who is winning the diplomatic battle of this war. White House envoy Steve Witkoff said during the Thursday cabinet meeting that in recent days, Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey had approached the United States and proposed to mediate. He confirmed that the U.S. gave Iran through Pakistan a 15-point action list that forms the framework for a peace deal. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar confirmed on social media that Islamabad is relaying messages between U.S. and Iranian officials. Dar wrote that the United States has shared 15 points that are being deliberated upon by Iran. German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful told German radio that he believed indirect contacts have taken place and that preparations have been made to meet directly and that it would be very soon in Pakistan. So there is something happening in the diplomatic space. Messages are moving, Pakistan is relaying, Turkey and Egypt are involved. The question that neither Witkoff nor Dar nor Waddeful can answer is whether any of this will produce an agreement that addresses Iran's 5 conditions in a form that Trump can present as achieving American objectives before April 6th runs out. Because Iran's first condition is guarantees that this war never happens again, and Iran's 5th condition is international recognition that Iran owns the Strait of Hormuz forever. Those are not negotiating positions that get resolved in 10 days between governments that are simultaneously bombing each other every night. Trump said something at his cabinet meeting on Thursday that was almost overlooked in the coverage of the deadline extension, but that may be the most revealing thing he said all week. He told cabinet members that taking Iran's oil is an option, and then immediately added, I would not talk about it. He said it and then said he would not say it in the same sentence. Taking Iran's oil refers to potential U.S. operations to seize Karg Island, the tiny strip of land in the northern Persian Gulf, from which 90% of Iranian crude oil is exported. The idea that the United States might seize Karg Island has been circulating in strategic discussions for weeks. CNN reported that Iran has been laying traps and moving military personnel and air defenses to Karg Island in preparation for exactly this scenario. An Iranian army commander warned this week that any ground warfare will be far more dangerous and costly for the enemy. Trump's off-the-cuff comment that seizing Iranian oil is an option, even while extending a diplomatic deadline, tells you something important about what is being discussed inside the cabinet room in the space between the public announcements and the Truth Social posts. April 6th is now the date that every government, every oil trader, and every American filling up their tank needs to understand as the next inflection point in this war. If April 6th arrives and Iran has not accepted the 15 points, and Hormuz has not reopened, and Trump extends the deadline a 4th time, the credibility of every future American ultimatum in this conflict will have been permanently damaged. If April 6th arrives and Trump orders strikes on Iranian power plants, he will be carrying out a threat that UN officials have said could constitute a war crime under the Geneva Conventions that would almost certainly trigger massive Iranian retaliation against Gulf energy infrastructure. And that would push oil prices toward the $150 level that Goldman Sachs and other analysts say could trigger a global recession. Those are the 2 options that are visible on the path to April 6th. A 3rd option exists, which is that the back-channel diplomacy through Pakistan produces a framework agreement that neither side has to publicly acknowledge as a surrender and that allows both Trump and Iranian leaders to declare some form of victory. That is the path everyone in the room is hoping for. But Iran's 5 conditions and America's 15 points are, as one source familiar with the discussions told CNN, not close. And there are only 10 days left on the clock. Subscribe right now because April 6th is the next deadline, and what happens when that clock runs out will determine whether this becomes the biggest military escalation yet or the beginning of an end that both sides can live with. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Trump will actually strike Iran's power plants on April 6th if there is no deal? Or do you think he will extend the deadline a 4th time, and what does that mean for America's position in this war?